The poignant saga unfolded at the dock, marking the last rendezvous between soldiers who had weathered the tempestuous Pacific battle. Despite the relentless cascade of rain, a throng of expectant wives gathered eagerly, eyes scanning the ship for their returning heroes. Among them was Paul, his heart buoyant with the anticipation of reuniting with Betty. Betty was nowhere to be found. Left alone at the bustling port, Paul felt a profound sense of solitude, a stark contrast to the joyous reunions unfolding around him. With a heavy heart, Paul ambled through the rain-soaked streets, finding solace in the familiarity of his apartment. His hands sought out a locket, cradling within it a cherished photograph of Betty. The room resonated with a blend of melancholy and nostalgia as he gripped the keys to his apartment. The inexplicable absence of Betty's warm welcome intensified the void left by her non-attendance at the dock. As he navigated the labyrinthine streets of his thoughts, Paul's yearning for Betty became palpable. A gnawing ache persisted, fueled by the stark contrast between the romantic dreams encapsulated in his letters and the somber reality of her unread responses. Despite the hurt, Paul's love for Betty remained unwavering, and he found solace in their intimate moments. Betty, younger than Paul, had navigated the vicissitudes of their relationship with a delicate dance of emotions. Her decision to cease reading Paul's letters, driven by an aversion to the vivid descriptions of war, inadvertently created a chasm between them. In a moment of revelation, Paul learned that Betty had retained every unopened letter, stashed away in a wooden trunk, a poignant testament to her inner struggle and unspoken love. The ensuing conversation between them became a crucible of emotions, a fusion of hurt and forgiveness. Paul, despite the emotional turmoil, chose a path of understanding and forgiveness. Their lips met in a poignant reconciliation, expressing a love that transcended the unspoken pain. In the wake of their tender moments, Paul's uniform adorned him once more as Betty lay peacefully sleeping. The next day heralded a new chapter, marked by Paul's departure for Sacramento. The bittersweet farewell, with a lingering kiss and an exchange of glances laden with unspoken promises, encapsulated the complexity of their relationship. The journey unfolded on a train, where serendipity introduced Paul to a captivating lady named Victoria. This serendipitous encounter became a prelude to unforeseen challenges. An altercation with perverts on the bus tested Paul's mettle as he stood up for Victoria, revealing the tenacity forged in the crucible of war. The subsequent journey, fraught with tension and exhaustion, led to the revelation of Victoria's pregnancy and her tumultuous relationship with the child's father. In an unexpected twist of fate, Paul assumed the role of a comforting presence for Victoria, proposing a fabricated marital alliance to shield her from the stern disapproval of her traditional father, Alberto. The meeting with Victoria's family unfolded in a tableau of contrasting emotions. Despite initial resistance from Alberto, Paul's character and sincerity began to permeate the familial dynamics. However, a defining moment transpired during a family dinner, where Alberto's prejudiced remarks targeted Paul's orphaned status. The confrontation, laden with hurtful words, underscored societal biases and shattered Paul's dreams of familial acceptance. Despite the pain, Paul maintained composure, gracefully excusing himself from the dinner table. The poignant night air witnessed Paul's departure, leaving behind a disappointed Victoria and a shattered dream of familial acceptance. As the train whisked him toward Sacramento, Paul found himself reminiscing about the childhood wishes he once cast upon stars, dreams of a family that now seemed elusive. Amidst the contemplative journey, a chance encounter with Victoria on the bus provided a glimmer of solace. Their brief interaction hinted at the possibility of understanding and mutual support, transcending the societal constraints that had marred their previous encounters. Harvesting begins. The Aragon family leads in picking ripe grapes from the vines. Paul is responsible for picking a row of fruits from the vines. Finally, he learned how to pick grapes. Next to him is Alberto, who effortlessly picks grapes. Paul watches him, learning his technique. Paul becomes faster at picking. Alberto notices and picks grapes even faster. They compete to see who can pick the fastest. On the side of the field, Victoria and the Aragon family smile as they watch Paul and Alberto. Paul keeps picking grapes, and so does Alberto. The competition ends when Alberto brings a box of grapes in front of everyone. Paul finishes just a moment after him. Both men look happy, and for the first time, Alberto genuinely smiles at Paul. Alberto raises a toast to celebrate the successful harvest. Some of the harvested grapes are poured into a large wooden vat. The Aragons continue the tradition of crushing the grapes manually with their feet during harvest time. In the late afternoon, everyone gathers around the wooden vat. The men bring different instruments and play lively music. Everyone dances to the beat. Meanwhile, wives enter the spacious vat and crush all the grapes with their feet. Victoria joined them, stomped her feet to mash the grapes along with the music. Victoria looked so beautiful as the orange light of sunset lit her face. She danced gracefully. Paul seemed to fall in love with her. Music continues, and the wives enjoy. They held hands and played like kids there. The Aragons noticed that Paul locked eyes with Victoria. He couldn't stop smiling while staring at her. They decided to carry him to let him inside the wooden vat. Paul giggled as he felt on his feet the grapes being crushed. Paul thinks he's finally accepted into the family. Before him is Victoria, smiling. The two had a wonderful time. Paul went wild and bathed himself in the grape extract. All of their clothes are wet. Paul and Victoria were drawn at the moment and went near each other. They initiated to kiss. The women teased them by pulling them away. Paul and Victoria ran to their room to continue the interrupted kiss. They looked so much in love as they shared their first kiss. Paul passionately kissed Victoria and caressed her on the bed. A little later, Paul stopped. He went away from Victoria. On the other hand, she was left unsatisfied. She asked Paul why he stopped. Paul confessed that he loves Victoria more than anything else. The two shed tears as Paul reminded the lady that he's still married to Betty, and it's not right to be romantically involved with her. Paul left the room. Victoria cried all night on her bed. She also fell in love with Paul but couldn't force him since he's married. The next day, Paul sat in the living area with a headache, thinking about what happened the night before. He was confused about what to do. Alberto, Victoria's father, came in looking for his hat and got irritated by his son, Pedro, who kept insisting on modernizing their family's grape plantation and partnering with large companies. Paul stood up and greeted Alberto, who was still irritated. Paul suggested borrowing from the bank in case of unexpected problems, but Alberto scolded him, saying he had no right to give instructions because he was just part of the harvesting. Victoria's dad then accused Paul of not being genuinely interested in Victoria, suspecting it because he saw Paul sleeping on the floor and couch at night. Victoria, passing by, saw her dad arguing with Paul. Paul didn't talk back, and Victoria told her dad that he was giving meaning to everything just to hate on Paul. Alberto, not convinced of Victoria's sudden marriage, wanted the truth. Tired of her father's arguments, Victoria asked if he wanted her to stay or leave Napa Valley. Alberto insisted on the truth he wanted to believe. Victoria walked away, and Paul broke the ice by telling Alberto the truth about Victoria going home because she loves her family. Alberto got angrier and scolded Paul for getting involved in their business. Paul insisted that Victoria is his business, and he cares about her situation. Unable to accept Paul into the family, Alberto yelled at him, saying he wouldn't inherit the vineyard just because he married his daughter. Paul noticed his missing coat containing keys to his room and a locket with Betty's picture. In the laundry area, a maid tried to wash it, but Paul remained calm. Seeing Victoria in pain, Paul offered to help, but she wanted him to continue his life without her. Paul left the mansion, and at the laundry area, he grabbed his wet coat, desperately wanting to avoid further involvement with the Aragon family. Don Pedro intercepted him, offering a special brandy. Paul, respectful, accepted the offer. Meanwhile, Victoria, sewing with maids, pretended to be composed but cried when asked about Paul. At the winery, Don Pedro and Paul talked, and the old man requested him to stay one more day. Paul couldn't decline. At night they drank, and Don Pedro sang a courtship song. Later, Victoria, teary-eyed, saw Paul singing outside her window. Paul sang with all his heart, waiting for Victoria to turn on the lights. However, she didn't, and Paul, torn between pursuing her and leaving due to his marriage, decided to leave. The next day, the wine-blessing ceremony began. Paul attended dressed as a soldier. Victoria, on a horse, looked beautiful but lonely. The Aragon family was present. Paul stared at Victoria, who noticed him but didn't smile. Father Couturi led the ceremony, and as it ended, Victoria called Paul to celebrate their what-ifs. Paul, despite the chaos, tried to bring happiness while looking at Victoria. Alberto, along with Father Couturi, unexpectedly introduced Paul as his son-in-law to the priest. Victoria, resigned to the situation, couldn't stop the announcement of her wedding to Paul. Although Paul insisted on revealing the truth, Alberto was insistent. Later, Paul, on his way back to Florida, has a nightmare, but it's interrupted by a vehicle. Meanwhile, in Napa Valley, Alberto is upset with Victoria, and she reflects on her experiences with Paul. In Florida, Paul discovers Betty's infidelity. She apologizes, hands him annulment papers, and confesses their incompatibility. Realizing he's free, Paul heads back to Napa Valley, enduring various challenges. In Napa, Alberto, still angry, refuses Paul's marriage proposal to Victoria, leading to a chaotic confrontation. A lamp thrown during the argument accidentally starts a fire in the vineyard. The fire devastates the vineyard, leaving everyone in despair. The next day, with the vineyard destroyed, Mr. Aragon confesses his fear of losing loved ones, and Don Pedro laments the loss of their ancestral vines. Paul, hopeful, retrieves a burnt vine with a living interior. The revelation brings joy, and Mr. Aragon acknowledges Paul's role in the family and approves his marriage to Victoria. In a shorter version, despite unforeseen events, Paul and Victoria's relationship faces unexpected challenges, including an abrupt wedding announcement. A series of trials ensue, including Paul's annulment, leading to a chaotic confrontation in Napa Valley that results in a devastating fire. However, Paul's discovery of a resilient vine offers hope for the family's future, leading to Mr. Aragon accepting Paul as part of the family and approving his marriage to Victoria.